Is the Democratic Republic of Congo on a path to renewed violence? The opposition wants the results of the presidential vote annulled and it's planning protests. So, can post-election chaos be averted in the African country? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Dareen Abughaida. Almost a week on from elections in the Democratic Republic of Congo, voters are waiting anxiously for the results. The presidential poll was marred by logistical problems and credibility concerns. The Electoral Commission says early results show President Felix Tshisekedi is in the lead. He's seeking a second term after winning the disputed 2018 election. But opposition candidates are complaining of irregularities and ballot fraud, and they want the vote annulled and are calling for protests this week. What happens if it's not? Is this a recipe for yet another cycle of violence and turmoil in the DRC? We'll discuss all this with our guests in a moment, but first, this report from Victoria Gatenby.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, all eyes are on the National Tallying Centre in Kinshasa. The Electoral Commission says early results favour incumbent Felix Tshisekedi. Opposition leaders say the election is a sham and they'll reject the results. The head of the Catholic Church in the DRC criticised the organisers of the polls. More than half of Congolese are Catholic, and the church plays a powerful role in a society that's been racked by poverty and conflict.
We have just witnessed what might be called a truly gigantic planned disorder. The unbearable images that have circulated following this electoral process. Women stripped naked, humiliated, beaten and thrown to the ground. If it's for the sake of power, that power can never come at the expense of a human being.
The DRC has a history of political instability. Tshisekedi's election victory in 2018 marked the first peaceful transfer of power in the DRC since it gained independence from Belgium more than 70 years ago. But even that was disputed. Tshisekedi promised change, yet many voters are frustrated by the high cost of living, inflation and rampant corruption. Some displaced people in the eastern region of North Kivu, where fighting has raged for years, didn't vote this time because election materials arrived late. And election observers have raised wider concerns about the vote.
The issues that we will be making recommendations about, and we have been making recommendations about, is to increase transparency, to increase the openness. There were problems on election day, but the CENI has not officially said, for instance, how many polling stations opened late, how many polling stations didn't open on December 20th.
There have been other disputed elections across Africa this year, including in Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Madagascar and Gabon, often resulting in violence and, in the case of the latter, a military coup. The DRC is rich in mineral resources and arable land, but it also has poor infrastructure and badly managed towns and cities. Disputed election results compound such problems. Some in the DRC fear the country could spiral into violence again. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
We'll now bring in our guest. Joining us from Kinshasa is Patrick Muyaya, who's the spokesperson for the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo. In the Cameroonian capital, Yaoundé, is Marie-Roger Biloa, who's an African affairs analyst and editor of Africa International Media Group. And from Arusha in Tanzania, we're joined by Jason Stearns, who's the founder of and strategic advisor to the Congo Research Group at New York University. Thank you for your time with us on Inside Story. Mr. Muyaya, I'll start with you. Opposition candidates have been denouncing the chaos as a result of this election being held and irregularities that took place on the first day of that vote. What's your reaction to that?
Firstly, we know opposition were preparing protestations than elections. We've been saying it previously in the past days. What we have seen on elections day is first to see the way Congolese people were mobilized. There were massive crowds in the front of polling stations. Of course, there were some difficulties about the the starting time of voting and other difficulty we have seen across the country. And I remember we as government on the elections day, we made a statement asking Electoral Commission to tackle those issues and to provide answer. So we cannot say that there was chaos, especially when you saw those massive people, Congolese people went to vote, just because there was there was some incident, which was managed later by the CENI who provide solutions. What we have to see here is that this election was inclusive because every candidate was able to run, and Congolese people were present on the election day to vote. There was, of course, some challenges with the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission was providing answer. So I won't say.
But what about? Let me ask you this: did you get an answer to these? There was a report, Mr. Muyaya. Sir, let me just jump in. There was one report that was saying that while the vote was officially extended until Thursday, ballots were still being cast on Saturday in remote areas. Can you confirm this, and how do you explain that?
You know, yes, I can confirm that votes went in some others constituency. People were able to vote until yesterday, and I think today too. You know what we have to understand here is that we cannot refuse to give the Congolese people opportunity to vote. Of course, the things should be done on December 20, but because of those mobilization, because of logistical problem, votes in certain area were delayed. And today, the main thing here is that Congolese people are able to vote, to cast their vote, to choose their coming leaders, which is very crucial for our democracy.
Okay, let's bring in Jason Stearns. Do you agree with that the most important thing here, Jason, is that people were able to cast their ballots?
Well, it's certainly extremely important that they could cast their ballots. I think that the question here is that why the elections weren't just simply postponed to allow for more time for preparations to be made. In many voting stations, not all of the equipment was there. There was massive failing of the electronic voting machines. The procès-verbaux, which is the signed piece of paper that every voting station has to provide to document the results, they often didn't have this piece of paper. And so I think in many of the cases, these problems could have been solved simply by postponing by 1 week or so, which is what they'd done in 2018, actually. So yes, I think every Congolese should absolutely have the right to vote, but I think also that more needed to be done. There were indeed massive irregularities across the board, as there have been in past elections, and I think that certainly is a shame.
Marie-Roger, please weigh in on this debate. And look, this has been described as a high-stakes election. What's at stake here?
Absolutely, high-stake election. There are several elections happening at the same time. You have people are electing the president, electing members of parliament, electing in the province leaders, or how you call them. So there were like tens of thousands of people campaigning throughout the country. So that was a huge thing. But what I want to say here is that election is a high stake usually because those who are organizing them, not only in DRC, in many countries in Africa, they are not prepared to lose them. And they do everything they can, even illegal things, irregular things, to get the result they want. So first, Mr. Kadima, the head of the Electoral Commission, his designation, his appointment has been very contentious. Many organizations, including the main religious groupings like the Catholic Church, which is very influential in DRC, and the Protestant grouping, also association, they opposed it. And it took weeks and weeks before the government and the president decided to impose that man. And why were people opposing his appointment? Because he was considered too close to the president, to the incumbent president, to be a neutral and a honest broker. So this took a lot of time, and he was confirmed in 2021. So 2 years later, where they scheduled this election, we saw that many things were not starting on time. And when you look at it, it's like the DRC authorities are not aware of what is at stake here. They have a huge country, 2.3 million square kilometers. That's the second largest country in Africa. And the transportation is, I won't say impossible, but it's so difficult. The roads, you can only fly, and there are no planes. There are not so many airports. And all this is a huge challenge. And they did not seem to realize that they had to be more serious about it. And the last thing I want to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
And one important challenge was also that they are facing an enemy at the border, at the eastern border, which is the M23 rebellion, armed group militia, backed by Rwanda, according to the United Nations, according to many countries, the United States, and etc. We know that. And what we saw was that a truce had been obtained.
Look, let me just jump in there. I mean, because you raise important points, and these are certainly challenges the country's facing, which I'd like to get onto. But allow me to bring in Mr. Muyaya to just address the claims that you made on Mr. Denis Kadima, who's the president of the National Electoral Commission, being too close to the government. Can you comment on that first?
I think Catholic and Protestant were not happy because when inside the churches they organized vote, their candidate wasn't elected. 6 of those different churches chose Mr. Kadima. It wasn't a question about Mr. Kadima being close to the President Tshisekedi or not. It was about being able to be the head of commission or not. And since day one, Catholic Church and Protestants started strong opposition against Mr. Kadima, which became a bit more personal about him. But today, 2 years later, we need to judge about what have been done as job at the Electoral Commission, and not going to speak that Mr. Kadima was close to Mr. Tshisekedi or not. It wasn't an objective argument. Now, what we have to focus on is to see what he has done as job. And we know we've been the first as government to recognize that there was some challenges. But listen, here you have 44 million voters. You have 100,000 different candidates. We have all those Congolese people who want to vote on the election days. So there was, of course, some incidents. But if you have to compare the number of the incidents and the big number, because it's about making voting people in 75,000 polling stations. It means that if you have incidents in 100 polling stations, of course, it's something, but it represents something very, very, very little things if you have to consider the presidential run, for instance, to give you an example. So today, I think the main things we have to see here is that Congolese people were able to vote, is that for the first time, as the new electoral law said, that CENI has to publish results by polling station. It's what Electoral Commission start doing in the past days. So I think there is a way we can see what was good, and judge the process not only on those bad things happen, those things even Electoral Commission was working on that, than saying that election was a massive chaos, etc.
Okay, let me bring in Jason
all
Stearns.
Those Congolese people we've been able to vote in that day.
Let me bring in Jason, because Jason, look, one opposition candidate who's a presidential candidate has alleged that the electoral fraud of the century was taking place. And now we know that there are calls for protests to take place on Wednesday over what some people believe are disputed election results. With Tshisekedi right now, with partial results being counted, he's at around 80%. Do you think that there's a wider political crisis that's going to develop here in the DRC if the result is not accepted and the country risks descending into violence and a national crisis?
I think it's difficult to say. I mean, we're about 30% through counting the results at the moment. As we've said before, there are widespread irregularities. There were delays. Voting stations did not open. There was violence in voting stations. The longer historical perspective here is that this is the fourth election to take place since the peace process. There was 2006, 2011, 2018, and then now. And with the exception of 2006, every single one of those votes have been deeply flawed. In 2011, the Catholic Church, the Carter Center, said that the elections do not reflect the will of the people. In 2018, most of independent observers said that Tshisekedi actually wasn't the winner of the presidential election, it was somebody else. And now, once again, we're back at a similar place. And so I think that the political crisis that's here is probably not going to be one where there could be a military coup, as there have been in other places, or even one where there's widespread mobilization and violence in the streets. I think that's probably unlikely. I think the biggest crisis here is the crisis of democracy. This exercise took $1 billion in an extremely poor country, cost $1 billion. This is, I think people will see, why should I go and vote anymore? If I'll walk for hours to get to a polling station and then I might not be able to vote, or then somebody else wins, other than the person who really actually won at the polls. I think that's probably the wider crisis that we need to point out here. And the final thing I would say is that if you look at all the problems that my colleagues have mentioned in terms of corruption, and especially in terms of insecurity in the East, 7 million people displaced in the Eastern Congo today. These are problems, largely speaking, of governance and of accountability. And the best way you can hold the government accountable is through elections. And so if that mechanism is not working, then there's a serious problem.
Okay, Marie-Roger, on the issue of democracy, to what extent do you think what's happening right now in the DRC hinders the country's progress towards sort of a more democratic future and more economic stability?
I could not agree more with what has just been said. What we could see on those polling days, election days, is the thirst for democracy, for participation. People in DRC want to be part of their national history, national decision-making. We see that so much. They came very early. They did this and that. They waited. They're very, very patient, despite all this. But the problem is that after spending so much money, but before saying that, but the problem in Africa right now, as we could see in many countries like Mali, Niger, and Guinea, for instance, where you have military coups and people dancing and chanting in the street to praise the putschists. There is a very important survey from the UNDP, which I recommend soldiers and citizens, where you see that despite all that, despite the sort of joy they have to get rid of the incumbent powers, Africans, 90% of Africans want a civilian government, but an accountable one, and one which is really elected, and a system which works. They are not against democracy. They are against this mockery of democracy. That's what is at stake here. And what we see here in DRC, where so much money has been spent, and where you see all this happening, okay, I don't need to repeat what has been saying in terms of dysfunctioning. At the end of the day, the process will not create consensus. It will create dissent after billions and so much time and so much effort. And that's the problem. And really, of course, we speak of violence, but this country is already in a violent context, with the Eastern Congo people displaced, with M23 of Rwanda attacking, and but they don't seem to be really aware. That's my main point. They don't seem to be aware of what is at stake here. People say, you look at a European country, at the US, all of them are preparing for the transition, the environmental, the energy transition. They say the electric car will be very important in the coming decades. So they are preparing to secure raw materials, and all of them look at the DRC, where they have like 70%.
Of course, because the Congo, you're referring to the Congo Basin, which of course is very important to international countries.
that don't even organize a proper election. And the
okay, let me bring in Mr. Patrick Muyaya. Just look, I mean, you've said that the most important thing here is that people were actually able to vote. But we know from the United Nations that because of the violence in the country and what's happening in the East with the M23 rebel group, there's a record number of people who've been displaced, almost 7 million. The figure is 6.9 million who've been displaced. Many were actually unable to register to vote or go back home to vote. So how does that impact the election? And do you fear that democracy here is at stake?
You say, I would like to make two quick comments before answering to your question on what Jason Stearns was saying here. I would like him to explain, to say that they know, as they did a poll where the president was the favorite. And here we are, of course, optimistic. We are waiting to see the president will be the winner because Congolese people massively voted for him, especially Congolese people from the East, because we've been there. You are raising the questions about international displaced people. You know, people came to start was trying to convince the president in the past month if we could postpone the elections to make sure we solve the issue with M23 before getting back to the elections. But here, the president and the government say no, because we want to consolidate our democracy, and we think that we should make sure we did our election on time so we can make sure our democracy is getting stronger.
But Mr. Muyaya, what record is Tshisekedi? What's his record here? What's his record here for Mr. Tshisekedi? I mean, he's overseen the largest displacement of people in a country, and also he's lost control of the east of the country.
No, please. Let me give you an answer. The drama in the eastern part of DRC started after the Rwandan genocide. More than 8 million died there. We have the biggest United Nations mission in the world in DRC for 20 years. Nothing was happened. And today, with the President Tshisekedi, we are working to reform our military system and etc. You heard the President Tshisekedi saying that we are even ready to make war with Rwanda to stop those things because international community is not acting effectively to solve the issue. You know, international community, when it comes to DRC, they are speaking every day about strengthened democracy, about human rights. We all know that Kagame and Rwanda are not able to deliver even a small quality of democracy and human rights. But we are committed to organize those elections. It costs more than 1 million. But we did that because we think that democracy is a key where we can see to provide sustainable solutions for people, especially in the East. And many of the people in the eastern part of DRC choose to vote for the President Tshisekedi with a clear strategy to finish the war in the East. But it requires time. You've been raising the issue of raw materials and all those strategic minerals. We have a clear strategy here inside the country. We are working on, but we cannot make big progress when those M23 are killing people in Virunga Park, are destroying ecosystem without having more condemnation, massive condemnation for international community.
Okay,
it's unfair for Congolese people. That's why
let me jump in there for the sake of time.
The coming president, we will by ourselves try to work to find a sustainable solution.
Jason, please respond to what we've heard, and how do you think the international community is going to be looking at this election?
Well, there's several things that the Minister, Patrick Muyaya, said that are correct. We did, in fact, do a poll ahead of the elections, just released a few days before the election, that suggested that President Tshisekedi, the incumbent, is by far the favorite in the election. But the question here is not whether he won the elections or not. I do think that he probably would have won the elections in a fair and transparent vote. The question is about the process, about the credibility and the legitimacy of the process. Even if he won, although the numbers that are being given are far higher than the numbers that were in our poll or even other polls that were conducted before the election, the question is about really, do the voters really believe in the credibility of the process? And it's not just the presidency at stake here. It's the National Assembly, it's the provincial assemblies, and those are at least as important as the presidency. So just to respond to that. With regards to the East, again, the minister is absolutely correct. The war was prompted by neighboring countries, especially the Rwandan government, who is not only backing the M23 rebels, whose troops, whose special forces are on Congolese soil and have been engaged and have been pushing the displacement of hundreds of thousands of people. in Eastern Congo. So absolutely, there is a huge burden of responsibility on the Rwandan government and there by proxy also the Rwandan supporters, because Rwanda is still a dramatic recipient of international aid, and especially the British government as well as the French government have been very reluctant to criticize the Rwandan government because they have other interests with regards to Rwanda. So absolutely, both Rwanda and members of the international community are complicit in this displacement in the Eastern Congo. But that doesn't absolve the Congolese government from responsibility. It has also failed to stabilize the Eastern Congo. It's not just the M23. There are 100 other armed groups in the Eastern Congo. And so I think they also bear a large responsibility in that as well.
Okay, Marie-Roger, please
Jason,
comment. I'll give you...
sorry to interrupt you, but...
Very briefly, Mr. Muyaya. Very briefly, we're running out of time.
No, sorry to interrupt Jason, but Jason knows that if we have to provide solutions, solution requires time. We won't be able to solve this issue in 2 years because the issue, we have that for 25 years today. So we should make sustainable solution and it requires time. We cannot find the solution while you have Rwandan troops continue to operate inside DRC, making more drama, killing more people, doing those massacres without having any
I'll have to give the final word to Ms. Marie-Roger. Final word to you. Just comment on what we've heard. And also, look, I mean, the country has a history of election-related violence. Tell us why. Put it in context.
Oh, yes, sure. Just because of the process, obviously, where people are not believing that it's free and fair. And, of course, you also have, as Mr.
Jason Stearns.
Mr. Jason said, you have Rwanda being very active in destabilizing Congo. Now they are sending special forces on the ground, and etc. And to me, one of the problems is not only the international community not active. To me, is the leadership of DRC not really taking in charge their destiny and opposing more decisiveness, more organization, more seriousness against what is happening, against the plans of Rwanda against them.
Okay, well, on that note, I will have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time with us on Inside Story. Patrick Muyaya, thank you. Marie-Roger Boliway, thank you. And Jason Stearns, thank you as well. Thanks for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From myself and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for watching. Bye-bye for now.